A man who loves you deeply keeps his distance because of one single trait. Have you ever been haunted by a question that refuses to leave your mind? A question so confusing that no matter how many times you replay every conversation, every message, every moment, you still cannot find the answer. If someone truly loves you, why would they walk away? Why would they become distant? Why would they stop calling, stop texting, stop showing up the way they once did? Society has conditioned us to believe that love always moves closer, that genuine affection always pursues, always fights, always stays. But life has a way of revealing a far more complicated truth. Sometimes the deepest love does not look like relentless pursuit. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like a man standing on the edge of everything he desires, convincing himself that he should never take another step. What if I told you that a man can love you with every fiber of his being and still choose to stay away? Not because his feelings disappeared, not because another woman replaced you, not because destiny separated you, but because of one hidden trait that quietly controls his decisions, distorts his perception, and convinces him that keeping his distance is the safest thing he can do. This single trait has destroyed countless relationships before they ever had the chance to flourish. It has turned loving men into silent observers, passionate hearts into emotional prisoners, and beautiful connections into painful misunderstandings. Today we are going beneath the surface. We are not talking about excuses or games. We are uncovering the invisible battle that many people never recognize. You may think his silence is his answer, but silence often speaks the loudest about what someone fears rather than what they feel. The truth is that people do not always run from those they don't love. More often, they run from the emotions they don't know how to handle. They run from the possibility of failure, rejection, inadequacy, or losing the very person they treasure the most. If you have ever wondered why someone who clearly cared suddenly became emotionally unavailable, if you have ever questioned whether distance always means indifference, then stay with me until the very end. Because once you understand the one trait that causes a deeply loving man to pull away, you will never look at love, relationships, or emotional distance the same way again. More importantly, you may finally discover that what appeared to be the end of a love story was, in many cases, the manifestation of a battle taking place entirely within one heart. His deepest fear is not rejection. It's feeling unworthy. One of the greatest misunderstandings in relationships is believing that when someone creates distance, it automatically means their feelings have faded. While that can sometimes be true, there is another reality that is far less obvious and far more painful. A man who loves you deeply may not be running from you at all. He may be running from the version of himself that he believes is not enough. The greatest obstacle standing between him and the love he desires is often not rejection, it is unworthiness. This invisible belief quietly shapes his thoughts, influences his decisions, and convinces him that no matter how much love he feels, he cannot truly deserve the happiness that stands before him. People often assume confidence is the opposite of fear, but many individuals learn to hide insecurity beneath a calm exterior. They smile, they work hard, they appear emotionally controlled, yet beneath the surface they carry a constant question: am I enough? Until that question is answered with genuine self-worth, even the strongest emotions can become tangled in hesitation. Think about how every action begins with an inner belief. If someone believes they are worthy of love, they naturally move toward connection, vulnerability, and commitment. But if someone secretly believes they are lacking, every expression of love becomes frightening. Compliments become difficult to accept. Affection feels temporary. A promising relationship becomes something that seems too good to be true. Instead of embracing happiness, they begin searching for reasons it will disappear. They expect disappointment before it arrives. They prepare for abandonment before anyone has left. This mindset creates emotional distance long before physical distance ever appears. The tragedy is that love itself often is not the problem. The problem is the image they carry of themselves. Imagine trying to hold water in a cup filled with cracks. No matter how much water is poured into it, the cup cannot keep it. In the same way, Love poured into a heart filled with deep feelings of inadequacy often leaks away through fear, doubt, and overthinking. The person receiving the love may genuinely appreciate it, but they struggle to believe it can last. Instead of asking, "How can I build this relationship?" they unconsciously ask, "When will this end?" That single expectation changes everything. Their actions begin matching their fears rather than their desires. They withdraw before they can be hurt. They become silent before difficult conversations begin. They convince themselves that leaving first will hurt less than being left later. This is why distance is not always evidence of a lack of love. Sometimes distance is evidence of an internal battle that has nothing to do with the other person. A man may replay conversations repeatedly, wondering whether he said the wrong thing. He may compare himself to people he believes are more successful, more attractive, more confident, or more emotionally available. Every comparison strengthens the belief that someone else could make you happier than he ever could. Instead of seeing your affection as proof that you choose him, he interprets it as something temporary that will eventually disappear once you realize his imperfections. Ironically, the very fear of losing love can become the reason he steps away from it. Many people spend years trying to earn love from others while never believing they deserve it themselves. They think achieving more, earning more money, becoming more successful, or appearing stronger will finally make them worthy. Yet no external achievement can permanently silence an internal belief of unworthiness. If the foundation is built upon self-doubt, every success simply raises the fear of losing it. Love then becomes another achievement to protect instead of a connection to enjoy. Rather than relaxing into the relationship, they remain emotionally guarded, always expecting something to go wrong. What makes this especially heartbreaking is that the other person often misunderstands the silence. They assume they did something wrong. They question their own value. They wonder why affection suddenly disappeared. Yet the distance may have very little to do with them. The struggle exists entirely within the mind of the one who is pulling away. They are fighting invisible battles that no one else can see. Every loving word they receive clashes with the harsh inner voice, telling them they are undeserving. Every opportunity for closeness awakens fears they have carried for years. It is not the relationship they fear. It is the possibility that the relationship will expose everything they secretly believe is wrong with them. This is why genuine healing never begins with changing another person's behavior. It begins with transforming the beliefs that shape that behavior. A person who recognizes their own worth no longer feels threatened by love. They stop assuming happiness must eventually disappear. They stop measuring themselves against impossible standards. Instead, they realize that love is not something they must constantly earn. It is something they can receive with openness, gratitude, and trust. As their inner confidence grows, their willingness to remain emotionally present grows as well. They no longer see intimacy as a risk, but as an opportunity to share their authentic self without fear. The lesson here is profound. When someone keeps their distance despite loving deeply, it does not automatically mean the love was weak. Sometimes the love is incredibly strong, but the belief in personal worth is painfully weak. Love may be reaching forward while insecurity is pulling backward, creating a constant emotional conflict. The heart says, "Go closer." Fear whispers, "You are not enough." Until that inner voice changes, even the deepest feelings can remain trapped behind silence. Understanding this truth allows us to see relationships with greater compassion. While every situation is unique and distance should never be romanticized or used to excuse unhealthy behavior, recognizing the role of self-worth reminds us that love and fear can exist in the same heart at the same time. The greatest transformation occurs when a person finally realizes that they do not need to become someone else to deserve love. They simply need to believe that they are already worthy of receiving the love that has been waiting for them all along. The one trait, insecurity hidden behind silence. If there is one trait that quietly destroys more relationships than almost any other, it is insecurity. Not the kind that announces itself through loud words or obvious behavior, but the kind that hides behind silence. It is the insecurity that smiles on the outside while battling storms on the inside. It is the insecurity that convinces a man to withdraw instead of expressing what he feels, to disappear instead of becoming vulnerable, and to create distance instead of risking emotional exposure. To the person on the receiving end, this silence often feels like indifference. It feels as though the love has vanished without explanation. But silence is not always the absence of love. More often, it is the language of fear. It is the sound of someone wrestling with emotions they have never learned to express. A deeply loving man may remain quiet, not because he has nothing to say, but because he believes that saying the wrong thing could cost him everything. Many people grow up believing that strength means hiding emotion. They are taught that showing fear is weakness, that admitting uncertainty is unattractive, and that revealing emotional needs makes them less valuable. Over time, these beliefs become deeply rooted. Instead of learning how to communicate openly, they learn how to suppress. Instead of asking for reassurance, they convince themselves they should handle every emotional burden alone. The result is a man who appears calm on the surface while carrying an exhausting internal dialogue. Every message becomes something to overthink. Every conversation becomes something to analyze. Every moment of vulnerability feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, uncertain whether taking one more step will lead to connection or heartbreak. This hidden insecurity often creates a dangerous pattern. Rather than moving closer to the person he loves, he begins testing the relationship in his own mind. He wonders whether your kindness is genuine or temporary. He questions whether your affection will last once you see all of his imperfections. Instead of accepting your love as real, he starts searching for signs that it will eventually disappear. A delayed reply becomes evidence that your interest is fading. A misunderstanding becomes proof that the relationship is failing. A difficult conversation becomes confirmation that he is not enough. None of these conclusions are necessarily based on reality. They are reflections of the fears already living inside him. When insecurity becomes the lens through which someone views love, even the healthiest relationship can begin to feel unstable. What makes this pattern so heartbreaking is that silence creates misunderstandings. While he believes he is protecting himself from pain, the other person experiences confusion and emotional distance. They begin asking questions that never receive answers. Did I do something wrong? Has he stopped caring? Why has everything changed? The absence of communication allows assumptions to replace truth. Two people who genuinely care for one another can slowly drift apart, not because love disappeared, but because fear spoke louder than honesty. The relationship begins to suffer from words that were never spoken, emotions that were never shared, and conversations that never happened. Insecurity also has a way of convincing someone that perfection is required before they deserve love. A man may believe he must have the perfect career, the perfect financial situation, the perfect appearance, or complete emotional certainty before he can fully commit. Until those impossible standards are met, he keeps his heart partially closed. He tells himself that once he becomes better, he will finally be ready. But perfection never arrives. There is always another goal, another fear, another reason to postpone vulnerability. Without realizing it, he allows months or even years to pass, while waiting to become someone he was never required to be in the first place. Another consequence of hidden insecurity is emotional self-sabotage. Just when the relationship begins to deepen, fear becomes louder than hope. Instead of embracing intimacy, he unconsciously creates space. He may respond less frequently, avoid meaningful conversations, or convince himself that ending things now will hurt less than risking greater pain later. From the outside, these actions seem irrational. Why would someone walk away from what they truly want? The answer lies in the nature of insecurity itself. Fear rarely behaves logically. It is designed to seek safety, even if that safety comes at the cost of happiness. To an insecure heart, distance can feel safer than vulnerability, even though it creates the very loneliness it hoped to avoid. It is also important to understand that silence should never be confused with emotional maturity. True emotional strength is not the ability to hide feelings, It is the courage to communicate them honestly. A mature man does not pretend he has no fears. He acknowledges them without allowing them to control his actions. He understands that lasting relationships are built through openness, trust, and consistent communication, not through emotional withdrawal. Love grows where honesty exists, and honesty requires the willingness to be seen as you truly are, imperfections and all. The turning point comes when insecurity is no longer allowed to define identity. The moment a person begins to recognize their own value, silence starts losing its power. Conversations become easier because there is less fear of judgment. Vulnerability becomes possible because there is less fear of rejection. Love becomes something to experience rather than something to constantly defend against. The walls that once seemed necessary slowly begin to fall, replaced by confidence that genuine connection is not created through perfection but through authenticity. The deeper lesson is this: if a man who loves deeply keeps his distance, the silence itself may reveal more than words ever could. It may reveal an inner struggle that has existed long before the relationship began. His quietness is not always a reflection of how much he values you. Sometimes it is a reflection of how little he values himself. Until that hidden insecurity is confronted, every opportunity for love will continue to compete with fear. But when self-worth finally replaces self-doubt, silence gives way to honest communication, emotional distance gives way to genuine closeness, and love is finally allowed to grow without being restrained by the invisible chains of insecurity. While love alone doesn't overcome inner wounds, one of the greatest myths about love is the belief that if someone truly loves you, everything else will simply fall into place. We are often told that love conquers all, heals every wound, and overcomes every obstacle. While love is undeniably powerful, it cannot automatically erase years of emotional conditioning, painful memories, or deeply rooted beliefs about oneself. A man may love you with complete sincerity, yet still struggle to receive that love, because his heart is carrying wounds that existed long before you entered his life. Love may knock on the door, but inner wounds often keep it from entering. This is why understanding a person's emotional history is just as important as understanding their present feelings. The heart is shaped not only by what it desires, but also by what it has survived. Every person carries an invisible story. Some stories are filled with encouragement, security, and acceptance. Others are marked by rejection, disappointment, betrayal, abandonment, or constant criticism. These experiences quietly shape how someone interprets relationships. A man who has repeatedly experienced emotional pain may begin believing that every close connection eventually leads to suffering. Even if he desperately wants to love again, part of his mind remains focused on avoiding another heartbreak. Instead of asking, "What beautiful future can we build together?" he unconsciously asks, "How can I protect myself if this falls apart?" This shift in perspective changes everything. Rather than approaching love with hope, he approaches it with caution. Rather than seeing possibilities, he sees potential dangers. Inner wounds rarely announce themselves openly. These disguise themselves as hesitation, emotional distance, overthinking, or inconsistency. From the outside, these behaviors can appear confusing or even hurtful. Someone may wonder why a man who seemed deeply interested suddenly became less available or emotionally withdrawn. They may assume his feelings have changed. In reality, his feelings may have become stronger, and that is exactly what frightened him. The deeper the emotional connection becomes, the greater the risk of emotional pain if it ends. For someone carrying unresolved wounds, greater love often means greater fear. His heart longs to move closer, while his past quietly reminds him of every time closeness resulted in disappointment. Imagine trying to drive forward while constantly looking in the rearview mirror. No matter how clear the road ahead may be, your attention remains fixed on what is behind you. Eventually, your ability to move confidently becomes limited. Emotional wounds work in much the same way. They cause people to judge the present through the lens of the past. A simple disagreement feels like the beginning of abandonment. A temporary misunderstanding feels like permanent rejection. A normal challenge within the relationship becomes evidence that history is repeating itself. The present moment is no longer experienced as it truly is because old pain keeps rewriting its meaning. Another challenge is that unresolved emotional wounds often create a fear of vulnerability. Loving someone requires opening your heart without guarantees. It means allowing another person to see your strengths as well as your imperfections. For someone who has previously been hurt after becoming emotionally vulnerable, this feels incredibly risky. They may decide that keeping part of themselves hidden is safer than risking complete openness. They tell themselves they are protecting their heart, yet the walls they build to keep pain out also prevent genuine intimacy from coming in. In trying to avoid heartbreak, they unknowingly block the very love they have been searching for. Many people also confuse healing with time. They believe that because years have passed, emotional wounds have disappeared. But time alone does not heal every hurt. Time simply creates distance from the event. True healing happens when painful experiences are understood, accepted, and no longer allowed to define one's identity. Without that inner work, old fears remain active beneath the surface, waiting for a meaningful relationship to awaken them again. Ironically, the healthiest relationships often expose the deepest wounds, because genuine love shines light on the places within us that still need healing. This explains why love sometimes feels complicated, even when two people sincerely care about one another. The relationship itself may not be the problem. The real challenge is that one or both individuals are carrying emotional burdens they have never fully released. They may genuinely desire closeness, yet instinctively retreat whenever intimacy deepens. Their actions seem contradictory because their heart and their fears are moving in opposite directions. One part longs to trust, while another part remains convinced that trust will eventually lead to pain. It is important, however, not to confuse understanding with responsibility. Recognizing that someone carries inner wounds can create compassion, but it does not mean another person can heal those wounds on their behalf. Love can provide support, encouragement, and a safe environment, but personal healing remains an individual journey. No relationship, no matter how loving, can permanently replace the work of confronting limiting beliefs, processing painful experiences, and developing genuine self-worth. Lasting change begins when someone chooses to stop allowing yesterday's pain to dictate today's decisions. When a man begins healing his inner world, remarkable changes occur. He no longer interprets every challenge as a threat to the relationship. He becomes more willing to communicate honestly instead of withdrawing into silence. Trust gradually replaces suspicion. Hope begins replacing fear. He realizes that the person standing before him is not responsible for the mistakes of people from his past. Instead of expecting history to repeat itself, he becomes willing to create a completely different future. This transformation does not happen overnight, but every step toward emotional healing strengthens his ability to love with greater freedom and confidence. The deepest lesson is this: love is powerful, but love alone is not enough when old wounds remain unhealed. Affection can open the door, but healing is what allows someone to walk through it. A man who keeps his distance may not be lacking love. He may be carrying pain that he has never learned to release. Until he confronts that pain, every opportunity for happiness will continue to compete with memories of hurt. But the moment he chooses healing over fear, the walls built by yesterday begin to crumble, making room for a love that is no longer controlled by the past but inspired by the possibilities of the future. Distant is sometimes a battle within, not against you. One of the most painful experiences in any relationship is watching someone you care about slowly pull away without giving you an explanation. The natural response is to look inward and wonder, what did I do wrong? We replay conversations, analyze every message, revisit every disagreement, and search for the exact moment everything changed. We often assume that if someone creates distance, it must be because something about us pushed them away. Yet there are times when the distance has very little to do with the other person. It is not a battle against you, it is a battle within them. A man who loves deeply can become trapped in an emotional conflict that leaves him feeling torn between what his heart desires and what his fears tell him to avoid. From the outside, his withdrawal looks intentional. Inside, however, it often feels like confusion, exhaustion, and emotional chaos. The human mind is capable of creating battles that no one else can see. A man may wake up thinking about the woman he loves, imagine a future with her, and genuinely long to be close to her. Yet within moments, another voice begins to question everything. What if I disappoint her? What if I cannot give her the life she deserves? What if she eventually realizes she can do better than me? What if I lose her after allowing myself to become completely attached? These questions slowly become louder than his feelings. Instead of allowing love to guide his actions, he allows fear to dictate his decisions. The result is a heartbreaking contradiction. The closer he wants to move emotionally, the farther he moves physically or emotionally, because retreat feels safer than risking disappointment. This inner conflict often creates behaviors that appear inconsistent. One day he is affectionate, attentive, and fully engaged. The next day he becomes quiet, distant, or emotionally unavailable. To the person experiencing this shift, it feels confusing and even unfair. They begin questioning whether the love was ever real. But inconsistency often the hallmark of someone who is fighting themselves rather than someone who has stopped caring. His emotions are genuine, yet his fears remain powerful. Every step toward intimacy is followed by a step backward because his heart and his insecurities are pulling him in opposite directions. Sometimes this internal battle is connected to a deep desire to protect the person he loves. He may convince himself that staying away is an act of kindness rather than rejection. If he believes he is emotionally damaged, financially unstable, or unable to provide the relationship he thinks you deserve, he may decide that distancing himself is the most loving thing he can do. While this conclusion may be misguided, it feels logical from his perspective. Instead of trusting that love grows through honesty and shared struggles, he believes he must first solve every problem alone before allowing someone else into his life. In doing so, he unintentionally deprives both people of the opportunity to grow together. There is also another hidden aspect of this battle, the fear of becoming emotionally dependent. Many people have experienced relationships where losing someone felt like losing themselves. As a result, they begin associating deep emotional attachment with vulnerability and pain. When they realize how much they care about someone, instead of celebrating that feeling, they become alarmed by it. They interpret emotional closeness as danger because it reminds them how much they stand to lose. Rather than embracing the relationship, they instinctively create distance to regain a sense of emotional control. Ironically, the very act meant to reduce pain often creates even greater loneliness. Overthinking fuels this internal struggle. Instead of living in the present, he constantly imagines future problems that have not happened. He creates conversations that never occurred, predicts endings that do not exist, and convinces himself of outcomes based entirely on fear rather than reality. Every unanswered question becomes an opportunity for anxiety to grow. Every period of silence becomes proof that something is wrong. In this state of mind, reality becomes less influential than imagination. His decisions are no longer based on what is actually happening between the two of you, but on the stories fear continues to tell him. This is why patience and perspective are so important when trying to understand emotional distance. It does not mean ignoring unhealthy behavior or accepting endless uncertainty. Healthy relationships require communication, respect, and mutual effort. However, recognizing that someone's withdrawal may stem from an internal struggle rather than a lack of love allows us to respond with greater wisdom instead of immediately assuming rejection. Sometimes people are not fighting against the relationship, they are fighting against the fears they have carried for years. Until those fears are addressed, they will continue to interfere with even the most genuine feelings. The true breakthrough occurs when a man stops treating his fears as facts. He begins questioning the negative stories he has repeated for so long. He realizes that love is not built by waiting until he becomes perfect. He understands that every meaningful relationship requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to be seen as he truly is. Instead of hiding behind emotional distance, he chooses open communication. Instead of assuming the worst, he allows trust to grow. Instead of allowing fear to write the ending before the story has truly begun, he starts creating a future based on hope rather than insecurity. The powerful lesson in all of this is that emotional distance is not always a verdict on your worth. Sometimes it is evidence of a private war taking place within someone else's heart. Their silence may reflect confusion rather than indifference. Their hesitation may reveal fear rather than a lack of affection. While love should never require you to endlessly chase someone who refuses to communicate, understanding this distinction helps you avoid carrying unnecessary guilt. Not every closed door exists because you were unwelcome. Sometimes the person on the other side is still struggling to unlock the doors they have built around their own heart. When those inner barriers finally fall, love is no longer forced to compete with fear, and genuine connection becomes possible because the battle within has finally begun to heal. Healing the trait that keeps love apart. As we reach the end of this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The greatest obstacle between two people who genuinely care for one another is often not the absence of love. It is the presence of unresolved insecurity. Love may exist in abundance, but if fear is allowed to lead, that love remains trapped behind walls of silence, hesitation, and emotional distance. This is why healing the one trait that keeps love apart is not simply about becoming a better partner. It is about becoming a healthier, more complete version of yourself. The moment insecurity loses its control, love no longer has to fight for space. It begins to flow naturally, honestly, and without the constant burden of fear. A relationship reaches its highest potential not when two perfect people meet, but when two individuals are willing to grow beyond the beliefs that have limited them for years. Healing always begins with awareness. A person cannot change what they refuse to acknowledge. Many men spend years believing that emotional withdrawal is simply part of their personality, never realizing it is actually a protective habit formed through past experiences. They assume silence is strength, distance is wisdom, and emotional self-reliance is maturity. Yet true strength has never been about hiding. Real strength is found in honesty. It is the courage to admit when fear exists instead of pretending it does not. It is the willingness to say, "I am struggling," instead of disappearing without explanation. The strongest hearts are not the ones that never feel afraid. They are the ones that refuse to let fear make every important decision. One of the most powerful transformations occurs when a man begins separating his identity from his past. For years, he may have believed that previous failures defined his future. A broken relationship convinced him that love always ends in disappointment. A painful rejection made him believe he would never be enough. Constant criticism caused him to measure his worth by impossible standards. These beliefs quietly became part of his identity. But healing begins when he realizes that yesterday's experiences are chapters of his story, not the title of his life. The past may explain his fears, but it does not have to determine his future. Every new day offers an opportunity to choose a different response, a different belief, and a different direction. Healing also requires replacing assumptions with communication. Fear thrives in silence because silence allows imagination to create stories that often have little connection to reality. Honest conversations interrupt those stories. Instead of assuming rejection, a healed person asks questions. Instead of disappearing, he expresses his concerns. Instead of expecting disappointment, he gives the relationship an opportunity to succeed. Communication becomes the bridge that carries two hearts across misunderstandings. It creates clarity where confusion once existed and builds trust where insecurity once ruled. Relationships are rarely destroyed by a single disagreement. They are more often weakened by conversations that never take place. Another essential step in healing is learning that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the foundation of genuine intimacy. A man who has spent years hiding his emotions may initially believe that opening his heart makes him fragile. In reality, the opposite is true. Emotional honesty requires far more courage than emotional avoidance. It takes strength to admit fears, express affection, and reveal imperfections without knowing exactly how another person will respond. But this willingness to be authentic is what transforms relationships from superficial connections into lasting partnerships. Love cannot fully exist where masks are constantly worn. It flourishes where two people feel safe enough to be seen exactly as they are. Perhaps the greatest shift happens when self-worth no longer depends on external approval. An insecure man often measures his value through achievements, financial success, physical appearance, or the opinions of others. His confidence rises and falls depending on circumstances beyond his control. A healed man, however, develops something far more stable. He understands that his worth is not earned by perfection, but recognized through self-acceptance. This inner confidence changes the way he loves. He no longer clings out of fear or withdraws out of insecurity. He chooses connection because he knows that genuine love is built on mutual respect rather than constant validation. He becomes capable of giving love freely because he is no longer desperately seeking proof that he deserves it. This transformation benefits both people in the relationship. The woman no longer has to guess what silence means because honesty replaces emotional withdrawal. She no longer carries the exhausting burden of trying to convince someone of their own worth. Instead, two emotionally healthy individuals support one another without expecting the relationship to fix wounds that only personal growth can heal. Their love becomes a partnership rather than a rescue mission. They encourage one another's dreams, face challenges together, and understand that while love is powerful, it grows strongest when rooted in trust, communication, and emotional maturity. There is another important lesson that deserves to be remembered. Compassion should never be confused with sacrificing your own peace. Understanding why someone creates distance can help you release unnecessary guilt, but it does not mean accepting endless inconsistency or waiting forever for someone who refuses to grow. Every healthy relationship requires mutual effort. Love should inspire healing, not become an excuse to avoid it. The person who truly values the relationship will eventually recognize that protecting themselves through endless distance also prevents them from experiencing the very connection they desire. Real love moves toward growth, accountability, and openness. As you reflect on everything we have explored today, remember this above all else. A man who loves you deeply may keep his distance because insecurity has convinced him he is not enough. Yet insecurity is not destiny. It is a mindset that can be challenged, transformed, and ultimately overcome. The walls built by fear are never stronger than the human capacity to heal. When self-worth replaces self-doubt, when honesty replaces silence, and when courage replaces avoidance, love no longer struggles to survive. It begins to thrive. The greatest relationships are not formed by people who have never been wounded. They are formed by people who choose not to let those wounds control the rest of their lives. In the end, the most powerful love story is not simply about finding the right person. It is about becoming the kind of person who is no longer afraid to give and receive love with an open heart, free from the chains of insecurity that once kept two souls apart.